When you got apples, you hunt the apples. Not again. For those of you who've been watching Death by Bunjie, you've heard me say that before. When you've got apples, you hunt the apples. Deer love apples. There's just no question about that. I've planted a lot of different food plots in the last 5 years or so and experimented with different crops. Apples are the one thing where I've seen deer come in and out at various times throughout the day. It's almost like they wait to hear those apples fall from the tree. They wait to hear that thump, and then they want to go in there and investigate and see if they can be the first one to get that new treat that just fell on the ground. Now, on the property where I grew up, there is a 100-year-old apple tree that about every other year gives me a really nice crop of apples. This year is no exception. If you've been following our Facebook page, you know that I've had pictures of deer under that apple tree this year. Now, not a lot of bucks, but we certainly have gotten a lot of does, and here we are early in the season, so it seems like a good time for me to sit in a blind 20 or so yards from that apple tree and see if I can get a shot at a doe. Now, don't worry. The Pennsylvania Crossbow season is 37 days long. It's 37 days of awesome. That season is just starting. We've got plenty of time to hunt over the food plots. For right now, though, I've got these apples that will fall for the first part of the crossbow season, and for that reason, I'm going to hunt over those apples. I've had really good success in the last few years hunting over this apple tree every odd-numbered year. I've shot a couple of does there before in the past, in the last couple of seasons where those apples fell. Now, I'd gone out of my way over the last few years to sort of design that area with that apple tree better. I cut down a large maple that I used to have a little tree stand in, cut that down and put a blind so that the blind is exactly 24 yards from the perimeter of the tree where the apples fall. So that gives me approximately a 20-yard shot if the deer come and start eating those apples, where those apples are likely to fall. So that way I'm perfectly set up for that shot. I pile brush in front of it, and I'm not particularly good at putting brush and brushing in a blind. I don't tend to do an awful lot of that, but I'm working on it, and a lot of the brush and stuff from the trees that I cut, I try to pile on this pile so that I can come back to it and eventually have a better brushed in blind there. I've also planted some other apple trees there and let some of the grasses grow up so the deer feel more comfortable. If you look back at some of my older videos where I've shot deer over this apple tree, you'll notice that it kind of looks like a lawn. It looks like a park. I basically had brush hogged it every year and kept it cut real short. Probably not a good idea. The deer feel less secure in an area like that. So the last couple of years, I haven't brush hogged it. Instead, I've let it grow up a little bit. Now, just because you got apples on the ground doesn't mean they're any less wary. Those deer, every time they come in, they're looking directly at the blind. They're very cautious because they're not too far from the house where I grew up either, so they don't feel completely safe when they're in there, and they're always on alert, so you do have to be careful. If you look back at my 2013 doe, for example, a hunt that I recently posted, you'll see that deer came in and was extremely cautious. It took me 10 minutes to finally get a shot at that deer to where I felt comfortable pulling the trigger. Check that hunt out if you haven't already. Now, I had been in this blind already this season. Earlier on the first day of the season, I came out, waited all year for this, set up on a Saturday morning, got there bright and early, and it rained and rained and rained on and off all day long. Seems to be that the rain is the story of the season this year on Death by Bunjie. Normally, I don't shoot a deer if it's raining because the blood trails are very difficult to follow. The rain will wash them away relatively quickly, and even if it's not raining, wet leaves do not show a blood trail real well. I still wanted to hunt on Saturday. I had waited all year long for this. I figured if I had a deer parked 20 yards broadside eating an apple under that apple tree, I probably could take the shot because I could be reasonably confident that deer wasn't going to go more than 40 to 60 yards. However, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it was starting to rain even harder. So I gathered up my equipment and I made a decision. It was very difficult to make. I didn't want to make, but it was nevertheless, I think, the right decision. I packed up my gear and I headed home. So I figured if I waited any longer, I might be spooking some of those deer that would normally make their way into that apple tree later in the day. So I made the executive decision to pack up and leave early. To increase my chances this year, I did one more thing. I got in there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, got all set up, because I know the deer will come in and out throughout the afternoon. I didn't want to get in there and cut it too close to the evening. I didn't want to spook any deer that may have been headed in there early, and I wanted to make sure that I was there if anybody came my way. Eventually, the sun was getting close to set. I was 15 minutes from the end of legal shooting hours, and I was at a point where I still hadn't seen any deer. Fortunately, 15 minutes before the end of legal shooting hours, all of a sudden I hear some leaves crashing on the other side of those briars. Somebody's excited, somebody's coming in for some apples. Standing in line at the dandy today, and I heard this woman in front of me say, feel sorry for me, 'cause I can't pay my bills, and my husband's no help, you know, he's drunk to the gills. That's right, at 6:45, a lonesome doe showed up all by herself. That is a sight I love to see. I prefer to shoot deer that are alone, if at all possible. I prefer to shoot those lonesome does, not because I'm worried about whether or not they're going to have fawns that they're going to orphan or anything like that. At this time of year, generally speaking, any of those fawns can survive on their own. They're all weaned from their mother and they're ready to go. They'll survive the winter just fine. My concern is I just don't want to have any witnesses when I pull the trigger. I don't want to leave any survivors, if you know what I mean. Basically, I don't want to taint that particular shooting area, that particular hunting location, by letting the deer know that something funny is going on there. Deer are already wary, at least where I hunt, all the time. They're always on edge, always alert. I don't want to increase that by having witnesses when I pull the trigger. So I try to and prefer to shoot deer when they're all alone. This was the perfect opportunity. She came in all alone. And it was a nice, big, fat, mature doe, and Bunjie and I were going to take that shot. It hadn't rained that day, and there was no rain in the immediate forecast, and I figured that's a great time to go track a deer. The leaves were nice and brown, they're all nice and pale, should show up a blood trail just fine. 2 years ago, in 2013, when I shot that doe, I had one of the best blood trails I'd ever had, a nice double lung pass-through shot, and the blood was on both sides of the deer as she was making her way out. I had no trouble tracking that deer. That's what I was hoping to accomplish here as well. The arrow looked pretty good. I had inspected that arrow when I got back to the house. Had really good blood on it. There were some spots where some bubbles had popped, so I know that I had gotten a lung. When I looked at the video, it looked like maybe I had shot back just a little bit. It looked like maybe the entrance wound with that deer quartering toward me, that it may not have been as good a shot as I had hoped. So I gave her a little bit of time, made my way down into the woods, cautiously later that evening with my nephew Nick to help me find that deer. When we started looking for blood, I started to get really, really nervous. We weren't seeing anything. I looked at the location where the shot took place, found no blood. Looked at the area where I found the arrow, found no blood. We start making our way out into the woods, both of us separately with flashlights, and he was behind me at first. I wasn't finding any blood trail, so we both panned out a little bit to try and crisscross until we found blood, and neither of us found anything. In fact, at one point we had gone 30 yards or so from the apple tree, and I was looking in one direction, he was looking in the other, and we still hadn't found a single drop of blood on a deer that I know I got a pass through on. So I don't know what's going on as far as this. I don't know if we're going to find that deer or not. I was really relieved when Nick calls to me though, and he says, "Hey, I found her. She's right up here." He could see the deer. She was all piled up, not 40 yards in a straight line from the apple tree, so she didn't go very far at all. In fact, like Nick had commented, she probably died before I even got out of the hunting blind. The entrance wound looked really good. It was a really good location for the shot. The exit wound, however, had plugged up with some of the entrails. She was not gut shot. It didn't pierce any of the entrails, and that's the whole reason we didn't see any blood. Sometimes that happens, I guess. It's just the way it is, but I'm really relieved that we found her, and in the end, it was a good shot. Like I said, she died in 40 yards, probably died in about 10 seconds.
We found her. Actually, she only went, I'd say, probably 40 yards. So, nice big doe. I think it's a 2.5-year-old doe. I'm not so sure. What you're looking at there is the exit wound. Now, it turns out I was looking at the entrance wound on this side, of course, because she was facing this way. Not a bad entrance wound, right about where I wanted, but she was quartering to me a little bit closer than what I thought. Exit wound, the reason we didn't find any blood, as Nick correctly pointed out, I believe, the entrails on the exit wound were plugging the hole, so she didn't get a chance to bleed out good. But she died very quickly, had no trouble finding her, just didn't have any blood trail. Good reason to, actually wouldn't have made any difference, I guess, if I shot her during the rain or not. Wouldn't have made any difference, because we'd still be in the same position, because we only found the deer first before we found any blood, so just as well. Well, I'm glad that this turned out nice.
And it's a perfect way to start out the Pennsylvania crossbow season. I still have one doe tag and one buck tag, lots of food plots to hunt over, and a couple other little tricks up my sleeve to hopefully chase that big buck this season. So stay tuned to Death by Bunjie. Make sure you subscribe, like our Facebook page so you can keep up to date with Death by Bunjie there as well. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!
All right, I've never used this light, and I've never used a nighttime recording like this. We'll see if this works. Right there's my lens. Oh, what are you doing?